We can walk across fire.
Tonight's talk is on freedom. And for starters, I simply want to acknowledge anyone who has ever been in the armed forces for putting their life on the line so that the rest of us can be free. In any capacity, thank you. Thank you so much, because it takes putting your life on the line to create freedom. And you in the armed forces have done that. So I want to start out by simply saying thank you. So I've been thinking a lot about freedom. Ever since for 20 years. It's been tremendously on my mind, and I will tell you why. 20 years ago, I came into a boatload of money. Enough money where I didn't have to work. I didn't have to do anything I didn't want to. All my bills were paid. I had enough to, if I wanted to run to the airport and jump on a plane and fly out that day or do whatever, buy something, I never had to look twice. I could just get whatever I wanted. I had my family with me. We had just moved to a new town called Asheville, North Carolina, where I was surrounded by beauty, by wonder. And one day, after we arrived down there, after I had, for my life, thought that the one thing that would bring me happiness was freedom. The one thing that would finally give me everything I wanted was freedom. And here I had all the freedom I thought I wanted. And as I stood there looking out at the beautiful scenery around me, I recognized how miserable I was. I recognized that I was in the midst of a deep depression. So I had achieved what I thought was freedom. I could do anything I wanted, anytime I wanted. And yet, I did not only not feel free, I felt miserable. And so from that moment forward, I have spent a lot of time thinking about what is freedom? What is it really? And it has come to me that freedom is something from within, that it is impossible to achieve out here. It is impossible for somebody else to give it to you. One of my favorite quotes is by a man who was incarcerated for 25 years, and at the 23rd year of being incarcerated said he was the freest he had ever felt in his life. And then 2 years later was released after being told he would be in prison for the rest of his days. So what happened there? He embodied freedom, felt it down to his core, knew what freedom was, and then inevitably, because it is inevitable, it manifested out here. Now the same thing went on with Gandhi. He freed not only himself but a country, and he did it from within. He did it without raising his hand. One of the most beautiful scenes I've ever witnessed was in his movie where he's with a minister and they're walking on the sidewalk at a time when the law was that he was not allowed to walk on that sidewalk. And he decided that he gets to decide from within what his freedom about that was. That it was not without. It was not that somebody else got to decide for him. And so even though he knew he was putting his life on the line, even though he knew he would never lift a hand to defend himself, he walked along that sidewalk and confronted the whites who ordered him off. And he said, "Are we not both men?" And stood in such dignity that they let him pass. He didn't know. He didn't know whether he'd be beaten or not. He just knew it was worth putting his life on the line for. And so when I think of freedom, I think of the chains within. I think of how have we chained ourselves through our beliefs, through our thoughts, through race consciousness. How have we chained ourselves by what we think to be true in a way that limits our freedom. I know I spend a lot of time thinking about that, thinking about the beliefs that hold me back, thinking about anything that might limit that sense of freedom and joy and wondrousness that I know comes up from within me and then bubbles out and becomes the life I live. And I'd love to say that in this 20 years, I've completely discovered and figured it all out and I'm joyous all the time. But there are those in my life who would beg to differ, who would be happy to tell you that there are times I'm as mad and upset as anybody else on this planet. But the difference is I know. Even when that happens, one of my favorite, and talk about freedom. There are certain things that I have recognized in my life that have given me freedom in ways that if before I didn't have. Like, for instance, one of my favorite ministers, Reverend Barbara Waterhouse, once said, "It's not what you do first, it's what you do second." So I give myself the freedom to react to a circumstance, but then grab a hold of myself and make sure that what I do second is in line with who I truly am. And there's freedom in that. There's freedom in our ability to be okay with ourselves. I was thinking today, just today, how much I've been working on the color of my presentation, getting the lighting just right, and how I can drive myself crazy about that because I can be obsessive. And I think there are people in my life who would agree that I can be obsessive about something. The thing is, though, is as I was watching myself get incredibly tense over whether the color was right or not, what else I needed to do, to buy, to this, to that, I realized, you know what? This is what I'm going to do. This is who I'm going to be. So why get all bent out of shape? Why get crazy about being crazy? Since this is how I'm going to be anyway. And I found tremendous freedom in that. In fact, I found joy and laughter in that. And the fact, I'm going to obsess about this till I get it right. That's just the way it is. So either I can beat myself up, be a tyrant inside, and curb my own freedom, or I can accept this about myself and let myself loose and let myself free, whether I'm obsessive or not. And it let me have a much better time today in terms of, I spent the last 2 hours in the car driving to buy bulbs because I wanted different bulbs for this presentation at 5:30. 2 hours in the car for bulbs. And I laughed almost the entire way because I knew that it was crazy. But I did it. And I'm really glad I did. Because look at the color. It's really good. So let yourself be crazy and be free in that. Let yourself be vibrant, boisterous, or shy. Let yourself be shy. Let yourself be who you are, because it is being the you that you are where freedom lives. Freedom lives in the beingness of who each of us are without comparing to anybody else. Without thinking somebody else gets to tell us what it is to be free or who it is we should be in this world. Or the tyrants we take on inside our heads. I know people who were browbeaten by their parents and then continue that browbeatenness inside themselves. Continue their parents' work. That's not free. Love, self-love, that's free. Loving ourselves deeply. Loving ourselves irregardless of how others see us. Making sure that how we see us is in a loving way. that we see ourselves as good, as whole, as complete. We see ourselves as the divine beings we are. We see ourselves as the God beings we are. Love, light, beauty. And if we're all a little scrunched up, we love that about ourselves too. Unchain yourself. Unchain yourself from anything that is less than the God being you are. Fly. Fly free. And the best way to do that is through spiritual practice. Practice, practice, practice. And what do I mean by that? I mean every single time you feel chained to a belief, remind yourself that it's not true. And go back to the truth, which is we are free. Anytime you compare yourself to somebody else, stop and remind yourself of the truth of the God being you are, in the unique God being you are. There is nothing to compare. Anytime you start beating yourself up around anything, stop. Stop. And remember that you would never do that to your best friend. And be a best friend to yourself. Set yourself free. Life is beautiful. Set yourself free. Only you can. No one else can do it for you, irregardless of any circumstance. Set yourself free. I love you. Thank you.
We can build a world that works for everyone when we believe. When we believe.